The morning sun cast long shadows across the royal palace grounds as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the final time. After 15 years of faithful service to the British Royal Guard, today would mark either his greatest triumph or his most devastating fall from grace. Marcus had always been different from the other guards. While his colleagues focused solely on protocol and tradition, he possessed an unusual gift for reading people and situations. His keen eye for detail had prevented 3 security breaches in the past year alone, earning him respect from his superiors and the quiet admiration of the royal family members he protected. The day began like any other. Marcus took his position at the main entrance of Buckingham Palace, his red uniform immaculate, his famous bearskin hat perfectly positioned. Tourists gathered as they always did, snapping photos and marveling at the stoic guards who seemed more like living statues than real people. But something felt wrong. Marcus noticed a man in the crowd who had been lingering for over an hour, pretending to read tourist brochures while his eyes constantly scanned the palace security measures. The stranger wore an expensive suit that didn't quite fit properly, and his shoes were polished to military standards despite his claims of being a businessman from Germany. As the morning progressed, Marcus observed the suspicious individual making subtle hand signals to 2 other men, positioned at different points around the palace perimeter. His training kicked in immediately. This wasn't random tourist behavior. This was reconnaissance for something much more serious. When Marcus tried to discreetly radio his observations to the security command center, he discovered that his communication device had been mysteriously jammed. The backup protocols he attempted to follow also failed to work. Someone had systematically disabled the palace's internal communication network, leaving the guards isolated and vulnerable. The situation escalated rapidly when Marcus noticed one of the suspicious men attempting to climb over a restricted area fence near the royal gardens. Without hesitation, Marcus broke protocol and left his ceremonial position to investigate. His years of military training before joining the Royal Guard served him well as he quietly approached the intruder. What Marcus discovered shocked him to his core. The man wasn't just attempting to breach security. He was placing what appeared to be explosive devices along the garden walls. Marcus realized he was witnessing the early stages of a coordinated terrorist attack on the royal residence. Acting on pure instinct and years of protective training, Marcus tackled the intruder to the ground. The struggle was brief but intense. The would-be terrorist was well trained in combat, but Marcus's determination to protect the royal family gave him the strength he needed to subdue the threat. However, Marcus's heroic actions would soon be twisted into something unrecognizable. Unknown to him, the terrorist he had captured was actually an undercover security agent conducting a classified training exercise. The explosive devices were sophisticated props designed to test the palace's defensive capabilities. Within minutes of the struggle, palace security forces surrounded Marcus. To the arriving officers, the scene looked entirely different from what had actually occurred. They saw a royal guard who had apparently attacked an innocent visitor without provocation. The undercover agent, maintaining his cover even in this confused situation, played the role of a terrified tourist who had been brutally assaulted. The misunderstanding grew worse when Marcus tried to explain what he had witnessed. His claims about suspicious behavior, communication jamming, and explosive devices sounded increasingly paranoid to the security team, who had no knowledge of the classified exercise taking place. Before Marcus could fully comprehend what was happening, cold metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The very hands that had served the crown faithfully for 15 years were now bound as if he were a common criminal. The tourist who had been admiring him moments earlier now stared in shock and began filming with their phones. News cameras seemed to appear from nowhere, capturing images of the disgraced royal guard being led away in restraints. The headlines would write themselves: Royal Guard gone rogue, palace security breakdown, trusted protector becomes threat. Marcus's reputation, built over years of dedicated service, crumbled in a matter of minutes. As he was escorted through the palace corridors, he had walked with pride countless times before. Marcus caught glimpses of the royal staff members he had come to know and respect. Their faces showed confusion, disappointment, and something that hurt him most of all: fear. They were afraid of him, the man who had dedicated his life to their protection. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus as he was placed in a holding cell within the very palace he had sworn to defend. Through the small window he could see the tourists still gathering, still taking photos, still marveling at the remaining guards who stood at attention. Life at the palace continued as if nothing had happened, while his world had completely collapsed. What Marcus didn't know was that his actions had indeed prevented a real threat, but not in the way he imagined. The classified training exercise had revealed serious vulnerabilities in the palace's security protocols. His quick thinking and decisive action had exposed these weaknesses before they could be exploited by actual terrorists. But this information was classified at the highest levels. The truth about what really happened that morning would remain buried in secret files. While Marcus faced the consequences of being in the wrong place at the right time, doing the right thing for what appeared to be all the wrong reasons. As the day progressed and the initial shock wore off, one person began to piece together the real story. Colonel Harrison Mitchell, head of palace security, had spent 30 years in military intelligence before accepting his current position. Unlike the younger officers who had responded to the incident, Colonel Mitchell recognized the signs of a training exercise gone wrong. The colonel's investigation would soon uncover a truth that would shock everyone involved and completely vindicate the handcuffed royal guard who had risked everything to protect the crown. Colonel Harrison Mitchell stood in his office overlooking the palace courtyard, watching the media circus unfold below. Reporters had gathered like vultures, their cameras pointed at every entrance, hoping to catch another glimpse of the disgraced royal guard story that was already dominating the evening news cycle. The colonel was a man who had seen real warfare, real terrorism, and real heroes. Something about the entire Marcus Thompson situation didn't sit right with him. In his 30 years of military intelligence, he had developed an instinct for distinguishing between genuine threats and misunderstood situations. Every fiber of his experienced intuition told him this case fell into the latter category. While the younger security officers celebrated what they believed was the quick apprehension of a rogue guard, Colonel Mitchell began his own quiet investigation. He started by reviewing the morning's security footage from multiple angles, something that hadn't been done in the rush to control the immediate situation. The first thing that caught his attention was Marcus's behavior in the hours leading up to the incident. The footage showed a guard who was clearly alert and observant, not erratic or unstable as the initial report suggested. Marcus had been systematically scanning the crowd, his movements precise and professional. This wasn't the behavior of someone planning to cause trouble. This was the behavior of someone detecting trouble. Colonel Mitchell then examined the footage of the 3 suspicious individuals Marcus had been watching. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The men were indeed conducting surveillance, their movements coordinated and professional. They weren't random tourists, and they certainly weren't innocent bystanders. The colonel's investigation led him to a classified file that had been buried in the system under multiple security clearances. The document revealed that a training exercise codenamed Royal Thunder had been scheduled for that exact morning. The exercise was designed to test the palace's response to a coordinated terrorist attack, using highly realistic scenarios and props. However, a critical communication breakdown had occurred. The memo informing the royal guards about the exercise had never been distributed, due to a bureaucratic error in the chain of command. The guards on duty that morning had no idea they were about to become unwilling participants in a security drill. As Colonel Mitchell dug deeper, he discovered that the communication jamming Marcus had experienced was real. It was part of the exercise protocol, designed to test how security personnel would respond when their normal channels were compromised. Marcus had responded exactly as he should have, but without knowing it was a drill. His actions appeared reckless and unauthorized. The terrorist Marcus had tackled was indeed Agent David Foster, a veteran undercover operative with 15 years of experience in counterterrorism. Foster had been so deep in his role that even when Marcus attacked him, he maintained his cover as a confused tourist. It was this commitment to the exercise that had led to Marcus's arrest. Colonel Mitchell arranged a private meeting with Agent Foster, who was recovering from minor injuries sustained during the struggle with Marcus. Foster's account of the incident painted a completely different picture from the official reports. "That guard saved my life," Foster admitted reluctantly. I was so focused on placing the training devices that I didn't notice a section of the garden wall was actually unstable. When he tackled me, he knocked me away from an area that collapsed just minutes later. If I had been placing a real device there, I would have been crushed. Foster continued his account, explaining how impressed he had been with Marcus's tactical approach. He moved like someone with real combat experience. His technique was flawless, and he showed remarkable restraint. He could have seriously injured me, but he was clearly trying to subdue, not harm. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but Colonel Mitchell knew that clearing Marcus's name wouldn't be simple. The story had already spread beyond the palace walls. Social media was flooded with images of the handcuffed royal guard, and various news outlets were running stories about security failures and the breakdown of trust within the royal protection system. Meanwhile, Marcus remained in the holding cell, unaware that his vindication was slowly being assembled by the colonel's methodical investigation. The psychological toll of the situation was enormous. Marcus had spent his entire adult life in service to his country, first as a soldier and then as a royal guard. The idea that he might be remembered as a traitor rather than a protector was devastating. The other guards were treating Marcus with a mixture of suspicion and pity. Some believed he had suffered some kind of mental breakdown, while others thought he might have been secretly harboring anti-royal sentiments. The camaraderie that had defined his 15 years of service evaporated overnight. Colonel Mitchell faced his own challenges as he worked to uncover the truth. Several high-ranking officials who had authorized the training exercise were now trying to distance themselves from the operation. The bureaucratic machinery that had created the communication breakdown was now working overtime to cover up the mistakes that had led to Marcus's false arrest. The colonel realized that simply presenting the facts might not be enough. Too many people had invested their credibility in the narrative that Marcus was a rogue guard. Admitting the truth would require several departments to acknowledge serious failures in planning and communication. As the second day of Marcus's detention began, Colonel Mitchell made a decision that would risk his own career. He chose to bypass the normal chain of command and take his findings directly to the highest levels of the royal household. The truth needed to come out regardless of the political consequences. The colonel prepared a comprehensive report that detailed every aspect of the incident, from the original authorization of the training exercise to the communication failures that led to Marcus's arrest. He included video evidence, witness statements, and a timeline that clearly showed Marcus had acted heroically, not criminally. But Colonel Mitchell knew that facts alone wouldn't be enough to restore Marcus's reputation. The damage to the guard's career and personal life had already been done. The colonel would need to find a way not just to clear Marcus's name, but to ensure he received the recognition he deserved for preventing what could have been a real security disaster. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everyone involved. The colonel's investigation had revealed the truth, but presenting that truth in a way that would restore justice without destroying careers and reputations would require all of his diplomatic skills and moral courage. The third morning of Marcus's detention brought unexpected visitors to the palace. Word of the incident had reached the highest levels of government, and several members of parliament were demanding answers about security protocols and the apparent breakdown in the royal guard system. Colonel Mitchell knew he was running out of time. Every hour that passed made it more difficult to control the narrative and restore Marcus's reputation. The media had already painted the story in broad strokes, and public opinion was forming based on incomplete and inaccurate information. In his private office, the colonel spread out all the evidence he had gathered. Security footage, classified documents, witness statements, and technical reports covered every surface of his desk. The truth was clear to anyone willing to examine the facts objectively. But the colonel knew that politics and public perception often mattered more than facts. His first challenge came from within the palace itself. Deputy Security Chief James Crawford had been one of the first responders to the incident and had personally overseen Marcus's arrest. Crawford's reputation was now tied to the narrative that Marcus was a rogue guard, and he wasn't willing to admit his mistake easily. Colonel, with all due respect, we cannot simply overturn a decision based on classified information that most people will never be allowed to see, Crawford argued during a tense morning meeting. The public needs to have confidence in our security measures. Admitting we arrested an innocent man for doing his job would undermine that confidence. Colonel Mitchell's response was measured but firm. "Deputy Crawford, our job is to protect the truth, not protect our own reputations." Sergeant Thompson acted exactly as we would want any guard to act in a genuine emergency. Punishing him for that sends the wrong message to every person who serves in this capacity. The debate continued for hours, with various officials weighing in on both sides. Some supported the colonel's position, while others worried about the broader implications of admitting such a significant error. The discussion revealed deep divisions within the palace security structure about priorities and accountability. While the officials debated, Marcus remained in his cell, unaware of the battle being fought on his behalf. His family had been notified of his arrest, but they were given only the official version of events. His wife Sarah and teenage daughter Emma were devastated, unable to understand how the man they knew as gentle and principled could be accused of such actions. The psychological pressure on Marcus was immense. Without access to the full story, he began to question his own actions. Had he overreacted? Had his years of military training made him too quick to resort to physical force? The isolation and uncertainty were breaking down his confidence in ways that physical hardship never could. Colonel Mitchell realized that saving Marcus would require more than just presenting evidence to committees and officials. He needed to find a way to demonstrate publicly that Marcus was a hero, not a villain. The solution came to him while reviewing Agent Foster's statement about the unstable garden wall. The colonel arranged for a structural engineering team to examine the section of wall where the incident had occurred. What they discovered was shocking. The wall had been weakened by recent construction work and was on the verge of complete collapse. If someone had been standing there when it fell, they would have been seriously injured or killed. This finding gave Colonel Mitchell the leverage he needed. Marcus hadn't just prevented a perceived terrorist attack. He had actually saved Agent Foster's life. The training exercise had inadvertently exposed a real safety hazard that could have resulted in tragedy. Armed with this new evidence, the colonel requested an emergency meeting with the palace's senior leadership. He presented his case methodically, showing how the communication breakdown had led to the false arrest, and how Marcus's quick thinking had prevented a real disaster during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. The reaction was mixed. Some officials were impressed by Marcus's heroism and wanted to immediately correct the injustice. Others were concerned about the legal and public relations implications of admitting such a significant error. The debate grew heated as different factions pushed their own agendas. During the meeting, news arrived that complicated the situation further. A major newspaper had obtained leaked footage of Marcus's arrest and was planning to run a front-page story the next morning. The headline was already written, "Royal Guard's Violent Attack on Innocent Tourist." The story would make Marcus's vindication much more difficult in public. Colonel Mitchell knew he had to act quickly. He made a decision that shocked everyone in the room. He announced that he would hold a press conference the next morning to tell the complete truth about the incident, regardless of the political consequences. "Gentlemen, we have a choice," the colonel said, addressing the room with the authority that had made him legendary in military circles. "We can continue to protect our own interests while destroying the life of a man who served his country faithfully. Or we can do what's right and accept the consequences." The room fell silent as the implications of his statement sank in. A public press conference would force everyone to take a position. There would be no more hiding behind classified information or bureaucratic procedures. The truth would be presented to the public, and they would have to live with the results. Some officials tried to talk the colonel out of his plan, offering compromises and alternative solutions. But Colonel Mitchell had made up his mind. His military background had taught him that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the tendency to choose political convenience over moral courage. As the meeting ended, Colonel Mitchell began preparing for what would be the most important press conference of his career. He knew that his own position might not survive the fallout, but he also knew that some things were more important than job security. The stage was set for a confrontation between truth and convenience, between justice and politics. Marcus's fate would be decided not in a closed committee room, but in the court of public opinion. Colonel Mitchell was about to gamble his career on the belief that people would recognize heroism when they saw it, even if it came in an unexpected form. The morning of the press conference arrived with unprecedented media attention. News crews from around the world had gathered outside the palace, sensing that this story was about to take a dramatic turn. The leaked footage from the previous day had only intensified public interest, with social media buzzing with theories and opinions about what really happened. Colonel Mitchell had spent the entire night reviewing his presentation and preparing for the questions that would inevitably follow. He knew that once he stepped in front of those cameras, there would be no going back. His decision to reveal the truth would either vindicate Marcus and expose the system's failures, or destroy both their careers in a spectacular public fashion. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his cell, unaware that his fate was about to be decided by a man he barely knew. 3 days of isolation had taken their toll. The proud, confident royal guard who had stood at attention for 15 years had been replaced by a confused and broken man who wondered if he would ever see his family again. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., but by 8 a.m., reporters were already jockeying for position in the palace's media room. The official announcement had simply stated that Colonel Mitchell would address questions about recent security incidents, but everyone knew this was about the Royal Guard story that had captured international attention. At 9:30 a.m., Colonel Mitchell received a phone call that nearly derailed his plans. Deputy Security Chief Crawford informed him that several high-ranking officials were threatening to prevent the press conference from taking place. They had the authority to stop him, and they were prepared to use it. "Colonel, you're about to destroy decades of trust in our security systems," Crawford warned. "Is one guard's reputation worth undermining public confidence in the entire Royal Protection Program?" Colonel Mitchell's response was swift and decisive. "Deputy Crawford, if our security systems can't survive the truth, then they deserve to be undermined. The public has a right to know what really happened, and Sergeant Thompson has a right to justice." The phone call ended with Crawford making it clear that the colonel was on his own. If the press conference went badly, no one would stand behind him. His 30-year career in military and palace security would end in disgrace. Despite the pressure, Colonel Mitchell proceeded with his plan. At exactly 10 a.m., he walked into the media room facing a sea of cameras and skeptical reporters. The questions began immediately, aggressive and pointed, based on the leaked footage and the official story that had been circulating for 3 days. "Colonel Mitchell, how do you explain a royal guard attacking an innocent tourist? Is it true that Sergeant Thompson had shown signs of mental instability before this incident? What steps are being taken to prevent similar attacks in the future?" Colonel Mitchell raised his hand for silence and began his prepared statement. What happened next stunned everyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to tell you that everything you think you know about this incident is wrong. Sergeant Marcus Thompson didn't attack an innocent tourist. He prevented a disaster and saved a man's life." The room erupted with questions, but the colonel continued. He systematically dismantled the official narrative, explaining the training exercise, the communication breakdown, and the real sequence of events. He showed the security footage from multiple angles, revealing Marcus's professional behavior and the genuine threat assessment that had triggered his response. The reporters were initially skeptical, having already committed to the rogue guard narrative. But as Colonel Mitchell presented evidence after evidence, the mood in the room began to shift. The leaked footage that had seemed to show an unprovoked attack suddenly looked very different when viewed in proper context. The colonel's most powerful moment came when he revealed the structural engineering report about the garden wall. He explained how Marcus's actions had inadvertently saved Agent Foster from serious injury or death, turning what appeared to be an assault into a heroic rescue. "Sergeant Thompson is not a rogue guard," Colonel Mitchell declared. "He is exactly the kind of person we want protecting the royal family. He identified a potential threat, acted decisively when normal protocols failed, and prevented what could have been a tragedy." The questions that followed were dramatically different from those at the beginning of the conference. Reporters who had been prepared to write stories about security failures and violent guards now found themselves covering a story about heroism and injustice. "Colonel, if Sergeant Thompson is innocent, why was he arrested? What accountability will there be for the officials who authorized his detention? When will Sergeant Thompson be released and reinstated?" Colonel Mitchell answered each question with the same methodical precision he had brought to his investigation. He didn't shy away from criticizing the system's failures or his own colleagues' rush to judgment. His willingness to accept responsibility for the institution's mistakes lent credibility to his defense of Marcus. As the press conference concluded, the colonel knew he had accomplished his primary goal. The truth was now public, and Marcus's reputation could begin to be restored. But he also knew that his own career was likely over. Several officials who had opposed the press conference were already planning their response. The immediate impact was dramatic. Within hours, the story had shifted from Royal Guard attacks tourist to Hero Guard wrongly arrested. Social media sentiment reversed completely, with people expressing outrage at Marcus's treatment and admiration for Colonel Mitchell's courage in revealing the truth. But the real test would come in the following days. Would the palace leadership stand behind the colonel's revelations, or would they sacrifice both him and Marcus to protect their own positions? The bureaucratic machinery that had created the crisis was now working to manage its aftermath. Late that evening, Colonel Mitchell received a call from the palace's highest levels. The conversation was brief but significant. He was informed that Marcus would be released immediately, and that a full review of the incident would be conducted. However, the call also made it clear that the colonel's decision to go public without authorization had consequences. While Marcus's vindication was assured, Colonel Mitchell's future remained uncertain. As he sat in his office that night, watching news reports about the press conference, Colonel Mitchell felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. He had risked everything to do what was right, and regardless of what happened to his career, Marcus Thompson would go home to his family with his honor intact. The cell door opened with a metallic clang that Marcus had heard countless times over the past 3 days, but this time it carried a different meaning. Instead of a guard bringing another tasteless meal or conducting another interrogation, Marcus saw Colonel Mitchell standing in the doorway with an expression he hadn't seen from anyone in authority since his arrest: respect. "Sergeant Thompson, you're free to go," the colonel said simply, "and I owe you an apology on behalf of everyone who jumped to conclusions." Marcus stood slowly, his legs unsteady after days of confinement and stress. The words didn't fully register at first. Freedom seemed like an impossible concept after experiencing the complete destruction of everything he had worked for throughout his adult life. "I don't understand, sir," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Has something changed?" Colonel Mitchell stepped into the cell and helped Marcus gather his few personal belongings. As they walked through the corridors that had once been Marcus's workplace, the colonel explained everything. The training exercise, the communication breakdown, the structural engineering report, and the press conference that had just concluded. Marcus listened in stunned silence as the full scope of the misunderstanding became clear. The mixture of relief and anger was overwhelming. Relief that his innocence had been proven. Anger that he had suffered 3 days of hell for doing exactly what he had been trained to do. "Why?" Marcus asked as they reached the administration area, where his personal effects were being returned. "Why did you risk your career to help me?" "You barely know me." Colonel Mitchell paused in the process of signing release forms. "Sergeant, I've spent 30 years in military intelligence and palace security. I've seen real villains and real heroes. What happened to you was an injustice, and injustice left uncorrected has a way of corrupting everything it touches." The walk to the palace entrance felt surreal to Marcus. Guards who had looked at him with suspicion and disgust 3 days earlier now stood at attention as he passed. Word of the press conference had spread quickly through the palace staff, and the mood had shifted dramatically. As they approached the main entrance, Colonel Mitchell warned Marcus about what awaited outside. "The media is expecting you, Sergeant. The story has changed completely since this morning. You're no longer the villain in this narrative." Marcus stepped outside into a wall of camera flashes and shouted questions. But instead of the hostile atmosphere he had expected, he was greeted by reporters asking about his heroism and his plans for the future. The questions were supportive, even sympathetic. "Sergeant Thompson, how does it feel to be vindicated? Will you be returning to your duties as a Royal Guard? What do you want people to know about what really happened?" Marcus was overwhelmed by the attention. 3 days earlier, these same cameras had captured his humiliation. Now they were documenting his vindication. The reversal was so complete and sudden that he struggled to process the emotional whiplash. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward to field most of the questions, allowing Marcus time to adjust to his newfound freedom. But when one reporter asked Marcus directly about his feelings toward the system that had wrongly imprisoned him, he felt compelled to respond. I served this country as a soldier for 8 years and as a royal guard for 15 years, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I did my job the way I was trained to do it. I'm grateful that the truth came out, and I'm grateful to Colonel Mitchell for having the courage to tell it. The crowd of reporters was impressed by Marcus's composure and dignity. Here was a man who had every right to be bitter and angry, yet he was responding with grace and professionalism. The narrative of Marcus as a hero was becoming more compelling by the minute. As the impromptu press conference wound down, Marcus was approached by Sarah and Emma, his wife and daughter who had been allowed into the palace grounds for the reunion. The embrace was emotional and cathartic, marking the end of the worst 3 days of their family's life. I never doubted you, Dad, Emma said through tears. I knew there had to be more to the story. Sarah was less composed. The stress of the past 3 days, combined with the public scrutiny and media attention, had taken a severe toll. How do we move forward from this? She asked. How do we rebuild after something like this? It was a question that would define the next phase of Marcus's life. While his innocence had been established and his reputation restored, the damage done by 3 days of false accusations couldn't be completely erased. The family would need time to heal and to adjust to the changed circumstances. Colonel Mitchell joined the family conversation, explaining that Marcus had several options going forward. The palace was prepared to offer him full reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology. There was also discussion of a commendation for his actions during the incident, but Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to return to his old position. The experience had changed his perspective on the institution he had served so faithfully. While he bore no personal grudges, he questioned whether he could ever fully trust a system that had been so quick to abandon him. I need time to think, Marcus told the colonel. This has all happened so fast. 3 days ago I was a prisoner, and now I'm being offered commendations. I need to process what this means for my family and my future. Colonel Mitchell understood completely.
Take all the time you need, Sergeant.
The offer will remain open, and we'll support whatever decision you make. As the family prepared to leave the palace grounds, Marcus took one last look at the building where he had spent so many years of his life. The red uniform he had worn with such pride for 15 years was being returned to him, but he wasn't sure if he would ever wear it again. The drive home was quiet, each family member lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. Marcus had been vindicated, but vindication came with its own challenges. How do you return to normal life after experiencing such a public fall from grace and subsequent redemption? The answer to that question would define not just Marcus's future, but also the lasting impact of Colonel Mitchell's courageous decision to choose truth over convenience. The real test of both men's character was just beginning. 6 months after the incident that nearly destroyed his life, Marcus Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at the Royal Military Academy, preparing to deliver a speech that would define his legacy. The journey from handcuffed prisoner to honored speaker had been extraordinary, but it was the personal transformation that meant the most to him. The immediate aftermath of his vindication had been challenging in ways Marcus hadn't expected. While the public narrative had shifted completely in his favor, the psychological impact of the false imprisonment lingered. Trust once broken required time and effort to rebuild, both in himself and in the institutions he had served. Marcus had ultimately decided not to return to his position as a royal guard. The experience had shown him that his skills and instincts could be valuable in other ways. After several conversations with Colonel Mitchell, who had become both a mentor and a friend, Marcus chose to join the palace's security training division. His new role involved teaching threat assessment and crisis response to new recruits. Who better to understand the importance of quick thinking and decisive action than someone who had lived through the consequences of both? Marcus discovered that he had a natural gift for instruction, able to share not just techniques but wisdom earned through experience. Colonel Mitchell's fate had taken a different path. While his decision to hold the press conference had initially put his career in jeopardy, the positive publicity generated by his courageous stand had ultimately enhanced his reputation. He was promoted to Director of Palace Security, a position that gave him the authority to implement the reforms that the incident had made necessary. The first major change was in communication protocols. Never again would a training exercise be conducted without all relevant personnel being informed. New backup systems were installed to prevent the kind of communication breakdown that had triggered the crisis. The lessons learned from Marcus's experience were built into every aspect of security operations. Agent Foster, the undercover operative who had been saved by Marcus's actions, became one of Marcus's strongest advocates. He regularly spoke at training sessions about the importance of trusting field personnel's instincts, even when situations seemed confusing or unclear. His testimony had been crucial in establishing Marcus's heroic status. The structural problems with the garden wall had been repaired, but not before a thorough investigation revealed that similar issues existed throughout the palace grounds. Marcus's inadvertent discovery of the safety hazard had prevented not just Agent Foster's injury, but potentially many others. The resulting renovation project improved security and safety throughout the royal residence. As Marcus prepared for his speech, he reflected on the broader lessons of his experience. The incident had revealed how quickly truth could be distorted, and how important it was to have people willing to fight for justice, even at personal cost. Colonel Mitchell's courage had saved not just Marcus's reputation, but the integrity of the entire security system. The speech itself was attended by security personnel, military officers, government officials, and members of the royal family. Marcus had been invited to share his perspective on leadership, crisis management, and moral courage. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now considered an expert on subjects he had learned through suffering rather than study. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over, Marcus began, his voice clear and confident. I had been labeled a rogue, a danger to the very institution I had spent 15 years protecting. But that experience taught me something valuable about the difference between reputation and character. Marcus continued, explaining how the incident had shown him the importance of acting on principle rather than convenience. He spoke about Colonel Mitchell's courage in choosing truth over political safety, and how that decision had restored not just Marcus's reputation, but faith in the system itself. Character is what you do when no one is watching, Marcus said, quoting a phrase that had sustained him during his darkest moments. But sometimes character is also what you do when everyone is watching, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The audience was captivated by Marcus's story and his insights into leadership under pressure. Several attendees later commented that his speech had been the most impactful presentation they had ever heard, about moral courage and institutional integrity. After the speech, Marcus was approached by several people whose lives had been touched by his story. A young security officer thanked him for showing that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, ultimately pays off. A government official praised him for handling his vindication with such grace and dignity. But the most meaningful conversation came from Colonel Mitchell himself, who had been in the audience throughout the speech. "Sergeant," he said, using the rank that Marcus still carried in his new position, "you've become the teacher I always hoped you could be. Your experience has made you wise in ways that years of training never could." Marcus smiled, thinking about how much his life had changed since that morning 6 months ago, when he had spotted suspicious activity in the palace courtyard. "Colonel, you taught me that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought against external enemies, but against the temptation to choose what's easy over what's right." The two men stood together, looking out over the academy grounds where future security personnel were training. Both knew that their experience had created lasting changes that would benefit countless people in the years to come. Marcus's family had also healed and grown stronger through the ordeal. Emma was now studying criminal justice, inspired by her father's experience to pursue a career in law enforcement. Sarah had returned to her job as a nurse, but with a new appreciation for the resilience and strength that had carried them through their darkest days. The incident that had begun with handcuffs and humiliation had ultimately produced heroes, reforms, and renewed faith in the power of truth to overcome injustice. Marcus Thompson had proven that sometimes the most important service to one's country comes not from following orders, but from following one's conscience. As he left the academy that day, Marcus reflected on the words he had spoken. Character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in moments of crisis. Both he and Colonel Mitchell had faced such a moment, and their responses had created a legacy that would inspire others long after. Their own careers had ended. The Royal Guard, who had been handcuffed, had indeed become something greater than he had ever imagined possible, but not in spite of his ordeal because of it.